Do you ever feel guilty because you don't have a strong sense of purpose in your life, but society has told you that it's extremely important? Does a sense of meaning or purpose actually make us feel more fulfilled? These are all things we're going to explore today in this episode. Welcome to Immersion, 30 minutes beneath the surface. Let's dive in. Let's look first at more situational meaning or interpretation in the small scale, and then we'll expand to our entire lives and larger scales. We assign meaning to so many different stimuli within our environment. An example from the Oxford Handbook of Positive Psychology, 2nd edition, says, one person might feel that a metropolitan smoking ban protects individual rights to be in public spaces without being subjected to cigarette smoke. Whereas another person might feel the same ban transgresses individual rights to use a legal consumer product. The stimulus is the same, but the interpretation varies greatly because meaning differs from person to person. And this chapter in the textbook, it is called Meaning in Life by Michael F. Steger. We can think of this as situational meaning we assign moment to moment. But a lot of what's talked about in positive psychology is much larger than that. It's the meaning that we give to our entire lives. Do our lives have meaning inherently, or is it all based on our interpretation also? Do we give them meaning? And because these are really big questions, let's look to two people that spent a lot of their lives asking these questions. The first is an existential philosopher, Jean-Paul Sartre, and he adamantly believed that our lives were like a blank canvas and we give our lives meaning. It is up to us. So to look at some of his quotes, he has said, life has no meaning priori. It is up to you to give it meaning, and value is nothing but the meaning that you choose. He also said, man is condemned to be free because once thrown into the world, he is responsible for everything he does. When we hear these quotes, it might feel that we are in a cold, indifferent, absurd universe. And freedom is both complete openness and possibility, but it comes at a cost, condemned to be free. That is phrased as if it is a punishment. And I think that Sartre is trying to get us to see it as all of these things. And we're almost floating untethered until we choose meaning, decide on it, and then tether ourselves to something. I have views that are in between this, and a very different point of view is from who you have likely heard of. Dr. Viktor Frankl wrote Man's Search for Meaning based on his experiences not only as a psychiatrist and a neurologist, but also his experiences as a Holocaust survivor. He faced extraordinary hardships between the years of 1942 and 1945, including losing his wife, father, mother, and a brother. Only he and his sister survived. And the reason you might have heard of him is because he was the first within the field of psychology to popularize the theory, to help grow the theory that meaning and purpose are the primary drivers of mental health and what humans crave deeply. And this differed from Adler or Freud, who pushed the idea that humans are after success or pleasure over pain, respectively. But Dr. Viktor Frankl proposes that we can find in each life situation meaning. The impression that I get from his work is that all of us are living with a vacuum and angst when we are not living our purpose, a boredom, apathy, lack of initiative. And the antidote to this is to find meaning. And he lays out ways to do this that I think are a bit more practical. He says that there are 3 types: creative, experiential, and attitudinal. I will link an interview where he talks about that below, but I'll discuss a couple highlights of that here. Creative acts where you are doing something at work, art, those things where you're pouring into something. Experiential, this is where you are being in the moment. You are with a human being, seeing how incredibly unique they are across from you. You are being with a beautiful sunset, and you are finding meaning through that rather than what you do. And finally, attitudinal, which has to do with our attitudes, for instance, how we view suffering or our values or even moments we cannot control. But for more on that, I would recommend going to his work directly, which I will link down below. But let's give you a real practical tool from logotherapy, which is the type of therapy developed by Viktor Frankl, where purpose and meaning are at the forefront. So there are many techniques within it. We're only going to cover one here because we have a lot to cover in this episode, but Dereflection. This is a tool where we shift the focus from ourselves to the outside, the external, to others. So instead of our anxieties, our preoccupations, self-observation, which if you're watching this, you clearly love psychology. Often, I think these types of people, and I would put myself in this bucket, we have a lot of introspection. What am I thinking? How can I improve? What are my values? Maybe some anxieties that predispose us to liking this field as well. And instead of doing that, which can turn into what many refer to as navel gazing, we shift the focus outward towards meaningful external focuses such as altruistic goals. And this could be something such as volunteering or something that might come to mind immediately, but it can even be small moment-to-moment interactions where we shift the focus outward. How can I listen more effectively to this person in front of me? And this is one solution you might have heard to social anxiety. Instead of thinking, how do I look right now? Instead think, what can I notice about these people here and how can I be present for them? And both as a gift to them, but also to yourself, because it feels a lot better in those situations to not focus on ourselves so much. So that's one tool within logotherapy. And you can look up logotherapy if you want. I can link some resources on it below, but it makes sense that this would be a tool within a framework where meaning is front and center, because within meaning, it's often tied to those outside of ourselves. The main areas where people often find meaning include, and by the way, this is from the textbook that we're using, relationships, art, health, religious beliefs, personal growth and values or self-transcendence, work achievements, and I would also add in contributions that you care about. And so many of these things, of course, are looking beyond simply ourselves, or even when they do have to do with ourselves, it's usually something in connection to others. Now, why should we care about meaning? Why are we even talking about this? So I do keep bringing up this textbook, and I want to give credit to, this is by Charles R. Snyder and Shane J. Lopez. And like I mentioned, this chapter is by Michael F. Steger. And within this chapter on meaning, they do bring up dozens of research studies where meaning is cited as being beneficial to people's lives. Generally happier, greater overall well-being and life satisfaction, greater control over their lives, more engaged at work, less depression and anxiety, less negative affect as a whole, less substance use, and there was even more. Now, I do want to make the distinction that this is having meaning. This is not necessarily searching for meaning. In fact, I saw on a different page that the search for meaning can be associated with negative affect, higher neuroticism, granted more openness. All of this makes sense. If someone feels like they're constantly like hunting for something and not having it, that could have to do with being open-minded, but also maybe a bit neurotic. And I associate with both of those. With that said, I also am very curious about, and I actually saw this in the book, but I was curious about this too, is it the chicken or the egg? Are people better off because they have meaning and then they have all those benefits we listed? Or are people that are less anxious, feel greater control over their lives, happier, are they more likely to be the types of people that would identify with having meaning? We don't know, but we will talk about very soon ways that we can create and or find meaning in our lives, depending on if you want to go with the Sartre approach or the Frankl approach. And I believe here we'll find a hybrid between the two. Oh, and one other benefit that I found really interesting is that meaning appears stable and independent from other forms of well-being over the course of a year. And I found that interesting, but it makes sense because your relationships, your health, all these things might ebb and flow. But I bet that if you truly identify with purpose or what you believe gives your life meaning, that's probably not going to change greatly between a Tuesday and a Friday. If all of this feels a bit abstract or nebulous, let's drill down on what exactly is meaning. So what I have here in my notes is that meaning is essentially how we make sense of ourselves, our lives, and the world around us and how we're connected to it. However, meaning can be defined different. It can mean different things depending on where you look. For instance, within the textbook, they had a section about a theory of meaning being heavily defined by purpose, and another definition had to do with significance or having one's life stand for something.
And I would connect this to a distinction I saw on the Positive Psychology Center at the University of Pennsylvania's website. They discuss the difference between meaning and mattering, and how we can get a sense of meaning and purpose from many aspects. They also include science, politics, justice, community, things we haven't talked about yet here. But then they make the distinction between that and mattering, which, to quote them, they say is a basic human need that people need to be needed in their relationships or at work. And that's where I think the significance portion comes in.
And one reason why this is important, we were alluding to it earlier, is that so much of our lives changes moment to moment, day to day, month to month. And we seek some constancy in our lives. And part of the reason why I think people are better off when they have a sense of meaning is because it is an anchor. We all, I think, to some extent, can feel untethered. This is partly why I think people are so hungry to get meaning from their work, to get meaning from their relationships, to feel like I'm tied to something that I care about. In fact, the book has a really good way to describe this. If we didn't have meaning, our lives would just be a series of events, one after the next. They wouldn't be a coherent story that, again, we can make sense of. I do think, though, that a meaning unchecked is not always a good thing. Think about someone that gives so much meaning to their work and chasing success in the eyes of others, and then they don't actually ask what gives them true meaning deep down. They've just been chasing what they've been told they should. And then they lose their job and they don't have that anchor anymore. And they also never found really what mattered to them at their core. They could feel shook to their core. They could feel like everything's crashing down. So it is really important to analyze this, even if it's something maybe you've never thought about before or that you do check in from time to time with. So how do we create or find meaning, and how do we check in with this from time to time? Can we build a recentering routine to make sure that our compass is aligned? I believe we can. If we were to take an approach between Sartre and Frankl, Frankl believed that you don't just create meaning like Sartre. You find it. You discover it. And this can feel, I think, difficult for people because there might be people that think, I haven't found my purpose. I think a lot of people feel guilt if they haven't identified with some sort of strong purpose. The lightning hasn't come out of the clouds and told them you will dedicate your life to XYZ.
In fact, I've known someone who saves lives for a living who feels as though they have not found their purpose. That's because society always makes this feel as though it is something out of reach for us.
But Frankl has a much more grounded approach to it, where we discover it by what is called upon us in that time of our lives. So for instance, there might be a role that you realize that you could fill in your family and then you want to fill and that your family is almost needing, and then you step into that, or at work. And so all of us, as we interact with the world around us, can find ways to contribute. There is some personal choice in the matter. And this is where I think it's not completely disconnected from Sartre's view, where there could be something at work where you come across a role where, wow, I could really fill that in. I could contribute here. So again, you have the skill sets. There's an opening. You feel like you would contribute greatly there. But if you do not want it, you do not need to. You get to choose what you put on the canvas of your life, like Sartre believed. So that's where I think that these two men are not as far apart as it seems. We're going through life, we're hit by different stimuli, different opportunities, and then we get to choose, you know what, I want to get meaning from this. We all have certain things that stir our hearts more. For someone, it might be animals. For another person, it might be safety for women. For another person, it might be food security. For another person, it might be in the legal field, and they might help people pro bono occasionally. So I think this is beautiful, that there is no one right answer, that we can follow both what the stimuli we come across in the world of what is called upon me in this moment, but also what do I feel that I want to do? And it doesn't just have to be causes. Again, it can be art, it can be relationships, it can be so many things. And I would love to hear from you about things that give your life meaning and how you've both found and created meaning in your life. And one other note on the idea of contribution for a cause that you care about, I think it can be easy to get bogged down in perfectionism or thinking that we have to make some huge impact. For example, maybe you're at a museum and you see something about climate change that's upsetting. And then unfortunately, that makes you just sort of want to shut down. What can you do, you feel like? But instead of that, what is one small thing that you could do? For instance, voting in a local election that you wouldn't usually vote in because something on the ballot pertains to environmental measures, or you know that a certain person that's running would do more for that cause than another person. We can take small actions and then through that find meaning too, rather than thinking that meaning always has to be something grand. Because this is immersion and we both want to mix practical takes with nuanced reflection, we're going to get into some action steps you can follow here. And then I want to do some final reflections at the end about meaning versus pleasure, how Zen Buddhism might fit into this, CBT, etc., fitting some puzzle pieces together at the end that are connected to this. Okay, so as we're getting into the action step component, I think we need to first differentiate when meaning is so clear and obvious and when you might need to think about it more. Imagine someone asked you if you wanted to miss out on some sleep tonight at 2 a.m. and sit in a fluorescent room for a few hours, or if you'd rather be in your bed. You would probably say that you'd rather be asleep in your bed. However, if there was the distinction that your loved one is in the hospital, many would gladly sit in that room at 2 a.m. because there is a different meaning associated with it. You don't have to think about giving meaning to that moment. It's inherent to it. Sometimes it is not that clear. Let's take an example of someone studying to work in the healthcare industry. They might need to take organic chemistry, and on the 37th organic chemistry problem, they might feel extremely frustrated. They might feel disconnected from their overall purpose and just feel as though they're in a rough time. They're going through it. They're not getting this. Their grades aren't that great. They're going to have to put in way more hours than they ever anticipated if they want to get into medical school or whatever they're studying for. In these moments, I like to think of what I call the Russian doll of goals. So if we think of some dolls with many other dolls within them, we have the outer layer, and that might be goal is to do this organic chemistry homework. Why? We open up that doll and go one layer down. To pass this class. Why? To get into medical school. Why? To become a doctor and help people with blood sugar management. And then why? To reduce suffering and connect with others through knowledge. So that was 5 layers deep, which actually works out really well because you might have heard of the 5 why exercise. This was developed by Sakichi Toyota, who worked in the business world, who developed this for actually solving manufacturing problems, asking 5 whys to drill down past symptoms into what I would assume is root cause. So we can do this with ourselves, because if we're in a moment doing a sort of action and we ask, why am I doing this? If we keep going down, we can get to our true why, which can relate to our meaning or purpose. And when that person is studying late, completely mentally fried, doing that organic chemistry, if they remember their purpose behind it to help reduce suffering, then it imbues it with meaning. That is the common thread through not only this episode, but our lives, is when we keep connecting these moments, these little snippets back to that meaning. It's the through line of our story. And it helps us feel more aligned. Oh yeah, that's why I'm doing this. And when we get off track, I think it also helps us catch ourselves, which brings me to a recentering exercise that I came up with for this. And I'm sure other people do similar versions. But weekly, one could ask themselves questions such as these. Where did my minutes go this week? Where is my time going? How do those minutes actually feed into my current goals? And how do those short-term goals connect to my long-term goals, including my purpose? Is the time leaking through the cracks, or is it connected to these things I really care about? If I were to stay on this track and fast forward 5 years, how do I feel about that? So this helps us see if we follow this track till the end of it, does it feel full, fulfilling, meaningful, or does it feel empty? And the reason why I call this a recentering practice is because I believe all of us get off track at times. And by at times, if you're anything like myself, it can feel almost constantly you're a little bit off track. But the beautiful part is, just like an airplane or a ship recalibrating to the direction they want to go, it doesn't matter if you're moving in the wrong direction, if you have a practice to regularly get back on track. And this is how we can avoid waking up in 10 years and asking, what have I done? Where has the time gone? Because you've continually checked in at intervals and said, oh, yeah, this is what matters to me. Let me get back on track for that. Now, going off of this and the idea of fulfillment, we need to pick back up with our hedonic and eudaimonic happiness conversation. Of course we do here, because eudaimonic happiness, like we've been talking about in this series, is tied to meaning. And I have a quote here from Dr. Michael Levin, and he is a professor and a researcher. This is from his blog. He said, imagine it's 20 years from now and you are super happy, fulfilled in every way. What does this look like? What does your day look like? What does your year look like in terms of which needles you've moved? Crucial thing to realize, there are two kinds of happiness which are often conflated. Hedonic happiness is how you're feeling right now. Eudaimonic happiness is more about long-term meaning and satisfaction. It's very hard to have both. You have to be very strategic, lucky, energetic, and self-aware to put yourself in a spot where you can optimize for both. The question is, what is more important to you? If you catch me at any moment, my hedonic happiness is low. I'm often rushed, stressed, chronically underrested, ticked off from all the practical stuff that it takes to push research forward. But my eudaimonic happiness is through the roof. When I look back at the end of the year or at a 5-year review and ask what my lab has done, I wouldn't change all the stress for anything, because the results have deep meaning to me. You have to decide, are you the person who values the daily journey or the specific destinations? I'll link his blog post down below. A lot of it is about other aspects and thought processes, but I think it's a very intelligent article, which is why I read that quote to you. I'm still finding the line between hedonic and eudaimonic happiness. It's something that I've talked about quite a bit in this series for a reason, because I think all of us feel sort of a push and pull between the simple pleasures of some ice cream in front of the TV sometimes, if we're so privileged to be able to have that at times, and then also the tug of war within ourselves of, I should be giving more time to the things that really matter to me. And with time, as we get to know ourselves better, as we get to know what matters to us, I think we find that magic line for ourselves of, this is what I value, this is how much energy I have to give to that. And then we can operate from this more powerful place of choice that the existentialist philosophers would stand behind and advocate for. Because, for example, Dr. Viktor Frankl even said that sometimes meaning is not through doing. It is through being. It is through observing the beauty around you. It is through being present with the person in front of you and appreciating the unique individual that they are. So I do think that it is important to not operate from a place of guilt, especially if you were raised in a society that told you you should always be contributing in some grand way. It's about finding what you value and how much energy you have to give and doing the best we can. And I'm still finding that line for myself and trying to walk it effectively day to day. So let's finish with a few closing thoughts. All of this is about changing our thought processes. So when you're in the struggle, whether that's in the gym, whether that's in the work session, whether that's waking up at 3 a.m. from a crying baby that you need to take care of, I really think meaning is essentially braiding different parts of our lives together. There's the moment of what you're doing. There's how you're making sense of it in the bigger picture. And for those of us that feel a bit fragmented, when we think about meaning, we're braiding the overarching story of our lives and what we've decided we care about with what we're doing in the moment so that we feel like I'm doing this for a reason. This suffering has reason. And also, I think when we feel sort of untethered and that feeling of, I don't know what I'm doing in my life, remembering what matters to you again is that tether. And we're braiding it back to, well, what can I do in this moment to contribute to that? Oh, I could make that one phone call that would help that person out. So that's how I would visualize it. And CBT and other tools that help us change our thought patterns can be a part of rewiring the way that we think. This feels like a bit of a heavy burden to carry. The idea of finding or creating meaning and braiding it into your life. We can approach life with a bit more Zen from Zen Buddhism. In that light, we are simply in the moment. We're not necessarily saying, what is the meaning of my life? What is the meaning of this task? We are simply in the moment. We drop into it. We drop all of the things that we're thinking about. And we might look back on our lives and realize, wow, that had a lot of meaning, but we were simply in those moments. And I think that is part of the reason why people do better when they're not constantly, again, searching for this. They're simply inhabiting that meaning. So I don't think that we need to constantly be thinking about it, or that could probably lead to some unhappiness. Like we talked about in the happiness episode, that the people that are often striving to be happy end up less happy and more lonely. So someone that has a more Zen approach, instead of when they're having a hard time at the gym, trying to connect it to, I'm doing this to be there for my family and to age healthily. Instead, they're with their breath, they're with their feeling in their body. And through being in that moment, we're showing up the best way we can in that moment. So that is another possible outlook. And finally, because this is part 9 in our positive psychology deep dive, let's anchor this in the PERMA Plus model that we've been using, which is that acronym within positive psychology for what constitutes a meaningful life that includes different tools that we can incorporate to give our life fulfillment and help us flourish. And the M in the PERMA Plus model is for meaning, as you likely have probably guessed by now if you knew about that model. So it's huge within the field. And I think it's important to understand that while I have said many view Martin Seligman as the father of positive psychology, I want to correct that here because I have heard that. But in researching this episode, I've seen that there are many fathers and mothers of positive psychology, people that helped bring this field to the forefront. And in this series, we've pulled from a lot of their research. We're talking about Carol Dweck, Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, Abraham Maslow, who I've talked about on this channel before, though not in this series. So many psychologists that you've likely heard about, they helped pave the way for this field. And Dr. Viktor Frankl is no different because by being a champion of the idea that meaning is integral to our lives, and meaning is such a big part of positive psychology, he was a big part in the development of this field. So to summarize, through the existentialist lens, it can be hauntingly beautiful to realize the power we have over our own lives, the blank canvas in front of us. And when we feel as though we have writer's block, when it comes to that, frozen in terms of what do I want to generate meaning from if it could be completely anything. For those of us that get stuck in those moments, yes, we can appreciate the openness that Sartre proposes, but we can also use the Frankl approach and instead ask, how can I plug in as the unique puzzle piece that I am in the place that I am at? How can, in this exact moment, I find meaning? Whether it's appreciating beauty, whether it's creating, whether it is through attitude. But I think of it instead as you're going through life one step in front of the other and seeing what you almost bump into. Oh, I'm in a conversation with my friend and I'm going to help them out because they're struggling by listening to them and being present with them, reflecting what I hear. And in the next moment, you might find meaning in writing an email, no matter how small it is, because you realize how it ties to your overarching goals. So through this, yes, it's a big topic, but we can find it in moment-to-moment actions through each step we take, through everything we come across. And sometimes we can be living it without even thinking about it if we're just present with what's around us through a more Zen approach.
As a closing segment, to quote a friend of mine when we were discussing this topic, she said, "When something is done with meaning, the ordinary becomes something more." And I want to play a voicemail from her because I thought we could all learn a bit more from her.
Hey, Pamela, it's Zoe. I do think that a search for meaning is synonymous with a search for truth. We're assigning meaning to things all the time, consciously and subconsciously. And when you can take a moment to pause and see that you're putting a perspective on something, it allows you to see what's really there and not necessarily the biases that you're bringing in the moment. And that can be used to your advantage when it comes to taking on challenges or tasks that feel really daunting and being able to realize that you can do it and one step at a time, or just making peace with something unfair, unreasonable that happened, or really any unlimited number of situations. So I think being able to not just experience meaning, because we're doing that all the time without thinking about it, but actually pause and reflect on the meaning you're assigning to something or someone allows you to be more free. And it's that like freedom that also gives unity. Yeah, I love this voice note feature. So excited to continue the conversation.
Thank you so much for being here. It means so much to me that you are here. You are why I do this. And I would love to hear your thoughts, whether you comment on YouTube or you leave a voicemail on our speak pipe. Speak with you in 2 more weeks for our final segment of this series on positive psychology, where we will be asking, is happiness the right goal? And how do cultures around the world look at the idea of the pursuit of happiness? Looking forward to speaking to you then. Have a good couple weeks.